Moana, fellow exiles. Yesterday was the big day. I finally was able to interview Jonathan Rogers, and it went well for the most part. There were some technical difficulties, and I did have some problems with
Oh, that's
positive
genius. Oh, Jonathan, you're such a god.
affirmations.
Oh, I cannot believe
Oh.
that. That's so smart. Oh, grinding
No.
your games. The absolute
No.
best. This makes total sense. Thank you.
Oh.
Oh, great. Amazing.
No.
Good. So good. Incredible.
Yeah.
Phenomenal. I cannot wait to play this game. Oh my goodness gracious. Just keep going. GGG. This is wonderful.
But in all seriousness, I learned from the interview. I cannot wait for the next one if I am granted the opportunity. And thank you so much for all of the constructive criticism in the comments. The feedback is completely warranted, and I'm reading it all. Now, without further ado, let's get into it because, oh my gosh, we learned some juicy information from the gray-haired god himself, Jonathan Rogers. Question 1. We just came from Exile Meet. What was the biggest positive piece of feedback from the people who played POE2 there? And what was the most surprising concern that people had about the game? Jonathan immediately went into how interesting and beloved the boss fights were in POE2. That's something that all the streamers, all the journalists, all the people who played POE2 at that demo really enjoyed. Also, the feel of combat with the Ranger especially. WASD movement just helped the flow of combat tremendously, and that's something that people pointed out universally as a W. Even WASD skeptics, people like Zizarin, they really loved WASD, and they cannot see themselves going back to click to move in POE2. As for the negatives, Jonathan said their eyes were opened up a bit about the traps that players can fall into, both new and old, right when they start the game. You know, if people don't get a good item drop for their build, or they just pick the wrong skill gem or something like that, that doesn't mesh well with the rest of their skill choices, they will just fall off entirely, and the game will become so difficult that they won't be able to progress. They want a level of variance between the worst player and the best player, but right now, especially at the outset of Path of Exile 2, that variance is too high. And really, I fell into this exact trap when I was playing in the demo. I played the warrior, I didn't have the best mix of skills, I didn't get any good item drops, particularly for the warrior, so I fell into this trap and I got stuck at a few bosses and packs were destroying me, but that's because early game itemization still needs to be improved, and really they need to figure out how to destroy that variance a bit. They want it to exist, but at early game, it shouldn't be as evident. I also asked a little bit about the tutorials in the game now. We have Eben voicing the skill gem tutorials wherein he explains exactly how the skill works, how you can use it, so on and so forth. And Jonathan said that is something that they look to integrate into the rest of the game for every single skill, for things like the passive tree, perhaps even trade. They also want to have videos explaining how various keystones work on the passive skill tree. So when you click into the passive skill tree and you hover over a keystone, there will be an option for someone to voice over and say, hey, this is how the keystone works. I know there's a description here, but here's how it actually works in the game itself, and here's an example. I think that's a huge win, and that is going to cause so many more people to not log out of the game and stay inside Path of Exile and learn about Path of Exile 2 within the game client. And even though content creators are a huge boon in this space, it is better for people to be able to learn everything they need to know about POE2 by staying inside the game. So this is a win from Grinding Your Games, and it was an immediate piece of interesting new information that we found out from the outset of the interview. Question 2. People noticed that there were item tiers appended to the end of certain unidentified items. Is this a preview of the new drop system in Path of Exile 2? Jonathan immediately said, hey, this wasn't actually supposed to be in, but yes, it is exactly what you're looking at. Items in Path of Exile 2 are going to have various tiers, and while they probably won't have, tier 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, with tier 5 being the best at the end of the day, internally, that's how they're labeled currently. Tier 5 being the best, and tier 1 being the worst. Now, when an item is set in a certain tier, let's say a tier 5 unidentified item, that means that this item will have drastically better rolls on it. So you know, when you hover your little ID scroll over, or you go to the hooded one and identify all items, you know that that item is going to have powerful mods and good rolls on it. This is incentivizing people to pick up more unidentified items, because right now a lot of people just walk on by unidentified items, and in Path of Exile 2 they really don't want that to happen. And while the tier 1 through 5 system is not going to make it into the game at the end of the day, they're going to have icons instead. So it won't be, oh, this is a tier 5 item, it's the most powerful. Perhaps there will be 3 stars on the item or something like that, to showcase that this is a good item. You want to pick it up, you want to see what the rolls are, and perhaps perform a little bit more crafting on it. This is also going to be applied to currencies. So a tier 5 currency is going to be much better than a tier 1 currency, and same with uniques as well. This is allowing them to sort loot in the world far more easily than they do today in Path of Exile 1. And really, the system itself looks like it's well designed, and I am excited to see it in POE2. They're focusing on the quality of drops and not the quantity, which honestly is a good thing, even from someone who just came out of Affliction League, in which the game was absolutely blasted with items on the ground. While that was cool, it's not good for the longevity of the game. Question 3. Path of Exile 2's closed beta is delayed, and the reason is sensible. However, many players have 2 burning questions. First, what will the alpha look like? And second, the wording around the closed beta now mentions it is early access. What has changed? Jonathan quickly clarified that the alpha that begins in June will be under NDA, and it will be for players who can thoroughly test said game. It's not going to be open to everyone, it's not going to be public, and I don't think you can buy your way into it. They want people who can give genuine feedback about the game itself before it goes public. Now, he also gave some other interesting information saying that people won't be boosted in this alpha. They want people to play the alpha from level 1 to level 100, testing all the bosses on the way, testing what endgame looks like, how the Ascendancies feel, what itemization is like, and yes, a small scale test of the economy as well. But he did mention they're not going to get a good bearing on what POE2's economy will look like with the instant buyout trading and with the gold until they have hundreds of thousands of players in-game end testing. But they're going to do their absolute best with the alpha. As for the early access / beta, there is no change on what it's going to be. Early access is the same thing as the closed beta. The way people get in is probably going to be through $10 to $30 passes, supporter packs, historical purchases, stuff like that, some random picks as well. Nothing has changed. It's merely marketing, and somebody said, hey, it would be cool if we put early access on the page. It's more modern than closed beta. So Jonathan said, hey, yeah, let's put early access on the brand new Path of Exile 2 website. And by the way, if you have not seen the new Path of Exile 2 website, I highly recommend you head on over and check it out. The next question, we popped on over to mounts. I essentially asked, hey, mounts are in Path of Exile 2. How in the world did that come about? Initially, I guess it was a joke mentioned by an animator, and then Jonathan said, hey, yeah, we should totally do mounts. Why not? Let's just put them in the game. And it wasn't because a rival like Diablo 4 did mounts and they wanted to one-up them. I kind of asked Jonathan about this, and he said, no, that wasn't it at all. We just thought it would be cool in the game, so we added it to the game, which is an awesome way to think about everything, honestly. And the way they're doing it too, with full mounted combat and having it so it's a gem, so you can ride the Roa on any class really, is awesome. I also asked if there would be further mounts in the game beyond the Roa, and he said there's no promises, but once you open Pandora's box, who knows what's going to come out of it. So of course, I think there will be more mounts in POE2, which is cool to hear. They also said that MTX was not top of mind, and he didn't actually think about Mount MTX until they announced the Roa mount in game. He was like, oh my gosh, of course people are going to think MTX is the reason we did this. We're going to make a ton of money on it. $60 mounts, spam it in the chat. So that was also just really wholesome to see that Jonathan and the rest of Grinding Gear Games first thought about how cool it would be to add a mount into POE2 if they implemented it properly, and then thought about all the other positive consequences later. Okay, next up, we touched a little bit on the Witch and what exactly happened with the reveal that was supposed to happen. Jonathan said that they were planning on revealing it, but in the final stages of development, Jonathan was not pleased with the visual clarity of the Witch. Because for a summoner in Path of Exile 2, you really want to have, 20 plus minions on the screen. And with the design they're going for, where POE2 is very clear, in boss fights, you know what's going on. Even when you're fighting packs, you know what's going on. He didn't think that it passed that bar of quality. So he said, okay, we're just going to go back to the drawing boards. We're going to make sure this is good before we show the public, because you only get that chance to show off a brand new class and suite of skills one time. So we will see it soon, but it's not ready quite yet. After that, I asked if they ported anything from POE1 to POE2 that they saw was just perfect, if he could pinpoint one singular thing. And Jonathan essentially said, hey, POE2 is built in POE1. You can port to all the POE1 areas in POE2. You can even use all the POE1 items in POE2 right now. They're the same game. So there's a lot of stuff from POE1 that will go to POE2 that they think just works. There's no one thing. So if you notice something in POE2 that was in the first game, it's just because they thought it was great and they don't need to change it. And I guess there's a lot of that stuff, which is cool to hear. I was really looking for just one perfect thing that Jonathan really loved going into POE2, but he just said there's going to be a slew of things. So look forward to finding all those out when we get our hands on POE2. Hearing this, I was a little curious, and I'd always wanted to ask when exactly they decided to split out POE2 from POE1. And it was a little bit after the initial Ranger reveal with the crossbow and the spears that they said, okay, there's a lot of stuff here that we want to change. And lots of people at the company are saying, oh, but if we change this, then it will destroy this build from POE1 and POE2, and we don't want that to happen. Jonathan essentially said, well, we don't want to constantly be going back to POE1 and saying, oh, POE2 is going to break this POE1 thing, we can't do this. They wanted to be unlimited, essentially. If they thought of a good idea, they wanted to put it into POE2. They said, let's not destroy POE1. It has its own unique identity. Let's just keep updating that. Let's split it out. POE2 will be its own game, and it will have a bunch of new things that weren't possible or just don't want to go into POE1. So that's why they decided to split it out. Very interesting to hear. They didn't want to nerf a bunch of stuff in POE1. They didn't want to change fundamental things like, you know, the Ascendancies or big items or anything like that. They wanted to keep everything in POE1 that was legendary, that was beloved in POE1 without changing it or sacrificing it at the altar of Path of Exile 2. Honestly, I think it was a good decision. I decided to build a little bit on this distinction between POE1 and POE2. You know, when I played POE2 at the demo at Exile Me, it had a distinct difference in flow. It was a lot slower, yes, a lot more tactical, and I asked Jonathan, hey, are you expecting this to constantly be the case in POE2, or are you going to speed up a lot in the end game or as you move through the acts, or is this the ideal level of speed you're looking for? Jonathan essentially said you need to feel more powerful in Act 2, 3, 4, 5, and so on as you progress through the campaign. There's various power thresholds that you hit where you feel more and more powerful. And yes, they still haven't showcased full character power. They did better with the Ranger with all the support gems that were shown, but still, as a character in POE2 at endgame, you're going to be armed with a suite of skills, support gems, powerful items, an Ascendancy class, and more. And they haven't showcased that yet, and they're very excited to. So yes, at the end of the day, at the pinnacle of POE2's endgame, you will feel like an absolute god. You will be blasting. But the journey there is distinctly slower and less zoomy than in POE1. Of course, with twinked gear on a second, third, fourth, or fifth character, you're going to be zooming through the campaign, destroying bosses and the like. But on your first character, even if you've played the POE2 campaign quite a bit, it's not going to be as destructive as in POE1. He also mentioned that right now in Act 2, characters are getting super powerful and able to destroy a lot of the content when they get some items. So they're doing some rebalancing there to make sure that the power level increases aren't too drastic as you move through the campaign. They want it to be a little bit more linear and not exponential until you hit that end game threshold. Really interesting to hear, and I cannot wait to see how it plays out in Path of Exile 2 when it launches. In this same vein, I was a little curious about map bosses in Path of Exile 2. They said that we should spend about 33% of our time in maps on the map boss itself. So will there be drastic changes from the map bosses, which we will also find in the campaign? He said yes, essentially. They're not just going to have more hit points, more damage, more of that stuff. They're going to have some changes to their phases and such. A phase that only occurs once in the campaign might occur instantly or 5 times in the map version of the boss. An ability that you see very rarely might be the primary ability of the map boss. So these fights will be drastically changed when you encounter the area bosses of the campaign in maps of POE2, which was refreshing to hear. I'm really excited to see what they do with these map bosses, given how complex and interesting they are in the campaign themselves. I also decided, hey, let's poke on Pinnacle bosses because we saw the Act boss for Act 1 for the first time. How the heck are they going to top all these bosses in POE2's campaign? Jonathan essentially said, well, we have to. We have to top the Act bosses. We have to top the area bosses in the campaign with the Pinnacles, and we are going to. And in fact, he gave a little bit of a teaser. They already have the concepts and the models for some Pinnacle bosses already made for Path of Exile 2, which is just super exciting to hear. That means they have a lot of that stuff already done for the campaign. They're gonna finish it out by June, I believe. But the Pinnacles, They probably won't be in the initial beta for POE2, but when it officially launches, Pinnacles will be in the game, and they're already working on them. So these are going to be absolute banger fights that we're going to go on, and I'm just so excited to see what they have in store for us, everyone. One last look at bosses. I asked about Lumerius, the guy who was on all the different promo art for POE2 now. He's the mainstay on the Path of Exile 2 website. He's on the back of my t-shirt that I got from Exile Meet. And I asked, is he really a giant, or is that hooded one just a statue, like a little cross hanging on a necklace? And he essentially said, yeah, that's a statue. It's not the actual hooded one. Lumerius is huge, but he's not as huge as you think he is. So that was interesting. Love to hear that. He did also say that there are massive bosses in POE2, and I mentioned, yeah, Krutog. We've seen Krutog. He's pretty big. And he said, oh, Krutog is small compared to some of the other bosses we have in POE2, which is wild. So we'll have screen-wide bosses in POE2, maybe bigger. We gotta see this stuff soon, guys. Oh my goodness gracious. All right, next was a little bit of an extended discussion about Ascendancies. I essentially asked him, hey, Ascendancy classes in POE2, back in 2019, they were doing wild things, giving us cat form, letting us use bows as melee weapons, perhaps dual-wielding shields. Is that still the design philosophy in Path of Exile 2 5 years out? He said, yeah, all the Ascendancies are doing stuff like that. There will be some that aren't as wild or drastic and are a little bit more, let's say, not pinpointed, but a lot of them are doing this wild stuff. You can't give information about them. I did try to dig a little bit deeper because I saw in the media kit there were 3 Ascendancy class names on the files: the Arcane Archer for the Ranger, the Earthshaker for the Warrior, and the Shaman for the Druid. He said while he cannot confirm those and the names are subject to change, those are the thematic ideas they are going for those 3 particular Ascendancy classes. If Grinding Your Games can nail down an Arcane Archer archetype, I will love them forever. D&D 5th edition did not, and I'm very disappointed in them for that, but if they can do it, GGG, oh my goodness, I will be playing that in POE2. Additionally, I tried to get a little bit more info and asked, Jonathan, which classes Ascendancies are you most excited for? Is there one in particular? And he mentioned there's a Sorceress Ascendancy that he thinks will be so unbelievably busted but fun that he can't reveal any more about, but he's just really excited. They sat down and just said, oh, this would be cool. That would be cool. Ooh, this would be super cool as well. And they packed it all into that Ascendancy, and it's looking pretty good right now. So let's try to guess which Ascendancy that is once they release all of them. I think it'll be pretty obvious given how powerful he seems to think it will be. I then asked briefly about the distinction between the Warrior and the Marauder. And Jonathan said essentially it's all about the speed of the class. The Warrior is going to be the slow-moving, bulky guy who specializes in maces and the like, and then the Marauder is going to be moving a bit faster. I think it's the distinction of a fighter versus a barbarian, essentially. He couldn't go deeper into it because they haven't done the full reveal, but that's the essence of the difference between the 2 classes. I also had one trading question wherein I asked, with the instant buyout system, can people buy items from sellers who are offline? He confirmed, yes, you can do that. Everyone, this is going to be a huge boon when it comes to just end of league stuff, when you want to buy stuff that's on this trading post essentially when nobody's online at the end of a league. So that's super cool. He then also went into a bit of a discussion about how he is a little bit trepidatious about all this and how careful they will have to be. And it's going to be scary because they're not going to get a good grasp on how trade will work until they get hundreds of thousands of players testing it. The alpha in June is not going to do. It's when the beta hits in late 2024 that they'll get a firmer grasp on how trade will work in PoE. And they're going to be a little bit conservative at first, making sure the barrier of entry to trade is higher because they don't want to increase costs after starting. They'd rather pull back costs if they find that it's too stringent on people selling and buying items on this trading post. So he's worried, but they're doing it. They made the change. They knew they needed to evolve. And he mentioned, people won't accept this in the modern day, the trading system that POE1 currently has. So I asked, hey, another developer said that a lot of the office played Diablo 4 when it came out. Did a lot of Grinding Your Games play Last Epoch when it came out? Jonathan said, yes, a lot of people did play Last Epoch. So I went a little deeper and said, did you learn anything positive? Just anything that you wanted to say about Last Epoch? I know you don't need to go in deep on it because they're a rival, another game in the space, but just please share your thoughts. And he did. He was very kind. He thinks that they have a firm grasp of what an ARPG is, and they learned a lot from the game, honestly. Obviously, trading was inspired by Last Epoch, and they made that change because of the positive reception to trade in Last Epoch. And he said, just an amazing line. Essentially, when a game in this space comes out, people need to play it and understand what it does well, what it doesn't do well, and they need to learn from it immediately and make changes in their own game. That's very respectable, and it was just great to hear Jonathan say that. Next up, I asked if there was one singular league that was very difficult to port to POE2, but they wanted to port it because Delve seems like it would be easy. Is there any hard league to port to POE2? And Jonathan essentially said, hey, there are some leagues that we really want to port that will need some drastic changes. And he actually singled out Blight as a league. He knows a lot of people really enjoy the tower defense aspect and a lot of people hate it, but he's looking to put it into POE2 in some way. I mentioned, hey, Sister Cassia definitely needs to be in the game. We need her singing. And he said, oh, we actually found a place for Sister Cassia. So confirmed, almost. Sister Cassia will be in POE2. Let's hope. I then briefly touched on party play in POE2, asking him essentially, hey, what are your design philosophies behind it? He said it's going to stay the same as in POE1 with that minor scaling. And in POE2, though, there's the combo capabilities, right? You can have a gas cloud put up by somebody shooting from a bow, and then a mercenary can incendiary bolt into it and cause a huge explosion. All these sorts of combos are commonplace in POE2, so they're wondering, do we actually need to scale monsters even more than we do currently in Path of Exile 1? Because in POE2, these combos are super powerful, and will they allow parties to absolutely annihilate bosses? It's a huge possibility. I also touched on whether or not aura stackers will be things, because Mark Roberts is a big fan of them. And he said, well, I'm not too sure. It's hard to know, without actually seeing people playing the game a ton, but he thinks they should have a place. It's possible, but he cannot confirm or deny. Okay, and then I brought up the campaign skip topic once again and asked, hey, is there any plans to randomize the campaign in any way to make repeat playthroughs, especially in the same league, a little bit different, and in subsequent leagues too? He said, yeah, they still plan on doing that. Every league will have a new random world map, essentially, where all the acts are randomized. He said the logic behind the actual act maps are the same as their maps themselves. A new act map will generate with every league, which means all the different puzzle pieces will shift around in a new league. So while you might go in one direction for a quest in League 1, in League 2, it'll be in the completely opposite direction and it will all be scrambled, and every town and every playthrough, league through league, will feel different. He's also keen on adding, changed up quests league to league. So you're not always doing the same quests. And the bosses and how you kill them and where you kill them and what rewards you get for killing them will also change league to league as well. So they are trying to randomize things up a bit. And he also mentioned that in POE1, they kind of stopped improving the campaign when they started working on POE2, and they're just now going back and trying to improve the campaign, and we can see those changes in Necropolis League. We haven't actually seen them yet, but they were mentioned. A lot of cool league mechanics will now be found in POE1's campaign early on. We can double corrupt something. The Dweller in the Deep is now an Essence Mob and other stuff like that. So it'll be really cool to see what they do with POE2's campaign and how it evolves over time. I also asked about a partial skip, just like what last Epoch does with the dungeons. And he said, I'm against it. I don't like it, but I'm very sure I will be talking about this in the future. I then moved on to a little bit of an end game thing, asking him essentially, hey, are the challenges and the MTX rewards per challenges staying in POE2? He confirmed, yes, they see no reason why they should remove them, so they will be in POE2. Awesome to hear from my standpoint. And then I also asked, hey, the first few Path of Exile 1 leagues had t-shirts which were sent out to the people who completed the challenges. I think it was the first 50 people who completed them. Could that happen again in POE2? And Jonathan said, hey, yeah, I love that sort of stuff. I'm not sure why we stopped. I'd have to ask Chris, but I would love to do it. I'm not sure if we can do it, but I would love to do it. So that's super cool. He also talked about a few niche challenges from early on in Path of Exile's life, like a level 1 top DPS challenge, and he said he loved those type of events. He loves breaking games and finding exploits or things that seem like exploits, right? That actually aren't. That really makes a lot of sense because that is what Path of Exile is, right? Lots of people finding the absolute best way to quote unquote break the game as much as possible. We then moved on and I asked about the worst bug from Exile Meet. He undoubtedly said it was the crossbow. We know that some people found a crossbow early on and were able to 5-shot bosses with the shotgun version of it. I believe that was Usis who was able to do that, and a lot of their footage was rendered unusable because of this bug. Jonathan absolutely hated that it was still in the game. It was from the build they used to test out the mercenary in Act 5, he said. So, confirmation that that was Act 5 in the mercenary showcase, and that it was overtuned and overbuffed and accidentally left inside the game. So no, we will not be able to 5-shot bosses with the crossbow in POE2. The next question was on the passive skill tree tooltip system and any other improvements that will be happening to the tree itself, as well as a little bit of a talk about POB. Jonathan essentially said, yeah, there's a lot going on there, and while you could see how each tooltip affected your character, there's still a bunch more that needs to be done there and is going to be done for the launch of POE2. You know, you could do this for all the tiny nodes. You're going to be able to do it for keystones to see how keystones exactly affect your character, and they hope to do it for items as well. So it's not just going to be keystones, it's not just going to be the small nodes, it's going to be items and basically everything else in PoE. And I'm a big fan of this as someone who doesn't use POB, and he was adamant on, yeah, this is a good thing as long as you can't see the effect of things that your character doesn't currently have. That's where third-party tools come into play. So if you want to make the perfect piece of rare gear inside of POB, go for it. But in Path of Exile 2, you will never be able to do that. There won't be any hero editing like there was back in Diablo 2. I then briefly asked him, hey, you were on the POE2 subreddit for a while. What happened? And he said, hey, I was on during the holidays, and then we got into this huge crunch season to make the Exile Meet demo as perfect as possible, and it was bad. A lot of us were working very long hours, and I do not want to do that again. Hey, it's one of the reasons that we've delayed the launch because we don't want crunch. Our studio is not a crunchy studio, even though we get a lot of content out. We don't like those long hours and those crunch periods. So that's what happened. I essentially was on the holidays and then I was in this crunch period. He wants to get back on the subreddit and he will, especially since now they have that elongated time period between now and the launch of the alpha and the early access period. The next question was about the biggest surprise at POE2's launch. What are people really going to be surprised by in Jonathan's eyes? And he said, essentially, unique items. There are so many uniques in POE2, and they're not going to reveal a lot of them before the launch. So during those first 2 weeks, 3 weeks, month, everyone's going to be figuring out what the unique items are in the game and how they mesh together to make those awesome builds. And that is a magical time for Jonathan. He said he's looking forward to it because that's kind of what happened with POE1. When they launched POE1, it was just such a magical period of time. And he thinks the same is going to happen with POE2 on a massive scale. He can't wait to be in the game playing it, in the chats, reading comments on YouTube, Reddit, the forums and everything. He just enjoys interacting with the community, and he cannot wait to see their reaction to all this stuff that's going to be hidden within the game. This was probably the most wholesome moment of the entire interview, and it was just genuinely great to see Jonathan so immersed in this thought and feeling of what the community will be like when Path of Exile 2 releases. I, of course, then had to pry a little bit and ask if he was scared about the POE2 release technically, and he said, hey, we're practicing a lot, we're testing servers already, we're making sure that there will be no issues, and hopefully there won't be. We are going to do our absolute best to make sure that we can withstand the load that will be coming our way. I then asked about bad choices in PoE. Is it acceptable for PoE2 to still have bad choices, as PoE1 definitely has, whether those are passives, items, keystones, ascendancies, so on and so forth. This led to a beautiful and long discussion from Jonathan about choices in ARPGs and in Path of Exile specifically. We talked a lot about the very first choice that people have when they open the passive skill tree, a defense node and an offensive node. People need to know that there is a right answer and a wrong answer for both. It is right to take the offensive node sometimes, same with the defensive node, and there will be consequences for both, and they need to get that balance pretty nice and carved out. But there will always be lots of edge cases and lots of consequences, and it's a really difficult conversation to have, and it's one that they've had a lot. That first node choice for the warrior, for example, has sparked hours and hours of discussion at Grinding Gear Games about what should be there and what shouldn't be there. And it was just fascinating to listen to Jonathan talk about this at length. It's evident that he is in the game. He is thinking about it constantly, and so are all the other developers there. Before my final question, I asked, hey, when people play Path of Exile 2 after playing Path of Exile 1 for so long, especially at the Grinding Gear Games offices, are they shocked? And yeah, Jonathan said people are shook when they play POE2 for the first time. And just recently, some of the people who have been working on POE2 for so long got their hands on it in depth for the first time on the Alpha Realms. And after playing it, they came to Jonathan and said, hey, I honestly didn't realize the game we were designing until I really got in there and testing it and playing it and exploring it and having tons of fun. It's so fundamentally different in feeling from POE1. And it genuinely excited all the employees there and Jonathan himself. So that was really cool to hear because that was my experience when playing POE2 for the first time as well. I then closed out the interview with one final question asking if Jonathan himself was pro or anti my use of his face in my thumbnails. He essentially said, you can do whatever you want. He doesn't think that he has the most appealing face, but go for it. When he goes on YouTube and sees his face in the thumbnail, he just goes, oh gosh, no, please. But I can still use it. So thank you for the permission, Jonathan. I appreciate that greatly. And that was it. That is the recap of my first interview ever, and it was with Jonathan Rogers, the game director on Path of Exile 2. I would like to take a moment to thank everyone who made this possible. The moderators that were in my chat the entire time and helped me prep for this. So Shiro, Omega Cybers, Vladis, and Enigmatic, you all absolutely rock, and I cannot appreciate you more. I also want to thank Madbone for helping out with the background piece. That was awesome, and I really was glad we were able to integrate some POE2 into the actual interview. And then also huge thanks to Scorewin, who made the overlay for the interview. Absolutely beautiful. It fit absolutely everything. And he ran me through setting up everything on Discord and everything. So huge appreciation there as well. And of course, a huge thanks to all my supporters on Patreon, YouTube, and on Twitch. Could not be doing this without you. Everyone who watched until the end and was there live, huge props to you as well. All the feedback I am taking completely to heart. The next time I get an interview, which hopefully I will, it will not happen, and I just took it as a learning experience. I know it could have been a lot better if I wasn't interjecting with those positive affirmations all the time. Really, I'm like that in real life, so my goodness, I wasn't reading the chat. I should have had my mod chat open. I've learned a lot for the next interview. So let's hope that's a banger, because this one was pretty darn good, even with the issues. I'm really hoping I can get another one and make all of you proud. I really appreciate all the support. Really, so good. So excited for POE2 and Path of Exile 1. New league coming up. That's going to be exciting too. I will be streaming that, and hopefully the quality is a little bit better. So that's it, everybody. I hope you have a wonderful day. Talakura, Exiles.